I think, to two things. Sanctioning Russia's trade, stopping the purchase of oil and gas, freezing the Nord Stream pipeline, Germany re-evaluating its energy policy, making it very clear to Russia that they really, they are changing the way that Europe deals with them in future. That, I think, really will have an impact.
But those billionaires close to Putin is very much part of the package in all Western capitals. Is it sensible that people who potentially could be on a future sanctions list are simply given time to move their assets around rather than impose it now and try to change behaviour in the Kremlin?
Well, I think you're going to see, a wave of sanctions, tiers of sanctions being
giving them time to evade them.
And the point of that, obviously, is to make Putin pause for thought, and so the sanctions are slowly cranked up if he doesn't withdraw his troops, or in the worst case, if he starts extending using his troops outside the area that's already occupied. So I do think it's right to keep some sanctions in reserve. But meantime, what Putin is facing, of course, is a much stronger NATO than we had 10 years ago, a stronger NATO than we had even a few weeks ago. We've seen not just higher defence spending, but more troop deployments on the eastern edge of NATO, and we've seen it coming together, finally, of France and Germany and Britain and the United States.
A brief final thought about your own Conservative Party, which has, of course, taken donations from those with Russian connections in the past. Should those donations now be reviewed with a view to perhaps returning some?
Well, certainly the party's been very careful, and there's law on this, not to accept donations from foreign sources. There are Russians who fled Putin's regime and are now in London who are as hostile to Putin's regime as the rest of us.
Not worth reviewing.
That's entirely a matter for the party. But that's not the big thing here. The big thing here, I think, is making sure that those sanctions really bite on Russia's economy.
So, Michael Fallon, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us live on the programme. Let's talk now to Anne Applebaum, staff writer at The Atlantic, who has covered Ukraine and Russia extensively for many, many years. And welcome here to the programme. You've written some fantastic pieces in recent months in The Atlantic. Explain to our audience why Putin would attack Ukraine. Is it strategic, emotional, ideological?
So it's a combination of all three of those things. In essence, Putin sees a democratic, sovereign Ukraine that wants to integrate with the West as a personal threat to him and to his form of power. He runs an autocratic kleptocracy in Russia, and he sees democracy activism, democracy movements anywhere really as a threat to him. That's one of the reasons he now intervenes in even in Western democracies, trying to shape public opinion there. But the fact is that Ukraine in 2014 had a democratic revolution. They removed an autocratic president. They replaced him with an elected president and then another elected president. That's exactly what Putin is afraid of in Russia. He's afraid of that kind of revolution in his own country. And because of Ukraine's proximity to Russia, its historical links to Russia, he sees that phenomenon in Ukraine as a personal threat.
What are the chances of him stopping here where he is currently and not having a full-scale invasion, in your view?
I think it's very unlikely that he's going to stop. He has not felt yet any real pushback from the West. He appears not to be afraid of sanctions or worried about them. Sanctions that we've applied in the past have always slipped over time. People were sanctioned and then they got fake passports and they got around it. And he's clearly not afraid of the small amount of Western military funding that has gone into Ukraine hitherto.
So that's a bit of control for that one.
The one thing that we can still do is we can still find better methods to deter him. We can still arm the Ukrainians. We can still begin to think a little bit longer term also about what our strategy is in Russia.
In that last phrase of arming Ukrainians, how much resistance is there likely to be, do you think, if there is combat in Ukraine, such a huge Russian force assembled at the borders, if it moves in? Are they capable of offering significant resistance, do you think?
Well, Zelensky has now called up the reserves. They have, depending on how you count, between 200,000 and 300,000